Hey guys, what's going on? I'm so pumped and excited. We have got Joshua Holland. You might know the man, the myth, the legend from social media. He is a holistic trainer, health coach, and an author himself. So we're going to be diving into quite a few areas that are going to be very applicable to you and maybe not even in your awareness yet. And that excites me the most because we're going to be talking about feet. We're going to be talking about how great the structure of the feet are and how we actually build our strength from the ground up and how we can really start returning back to using our bodies like our ancestors used to and not be rigid sitting in a bench in a gym under LED lights, and we can actually get out into nature and move like animals.
Welcome to Simply Walk the Talk. Our bodies and minds adapt to what we do most of the time. If you want to change your body and mind, you must change what it is you do most of the time. This podcast explores all things health, wellness, fitness, lifestyle, and biohacking. Stay tuned as we explore various thoughts, methods, and experiences from a multitude of conversations between our interesting guests and experts through many fields of work. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Simply walk the talk. Simply walk the talk.
And that's why I brought Joshua onto the show. So welcome, brother.
Thank you so much. This is actually I'm kind of excited to do this as well. As you probably know, I have my own podcast, and so like being on the other side of it is always kind of fun as well because I get a chance to see different styles of interview and things like that. But I can just tell you from the bit of time we've spent before recording, I can tell this is going to be a fun one. So hopefully it's the same for people enjoying this as well.
Yeah, I'm so excited. And wherever you're listening to this, just drop your comments below. Joshua or myself will definitely answer. So I think one of the biggest things that stood out for me that attracted me to you, the foreplay to our dating that started, was essentially your focus on literally just being outdoors all the time and talking about the benefit of just being outdoors and grounding. And my wife and I were just talking about how little people actually understand of what grounding actually is. So I think that's one area we can go into straight away, and also why it's been so important on your journey to develop movements in a barefoot manner. So like grounding and barefoot manner, like why are those two elements so important to your life?
Oh, okay. All right. I'm assuming this is just an audio only, right? Because do you record video?
We know we're recording video right now. So
okay, great. For the people who are watching this, you can see this big smile on my face, and it's like the way I live my life is. Some people might look at it like very chaotic, but other people might think that like I've just got everything in place. But regardless of how you see that, I'm trying to do the best I can to try to maximize and optimize and thrive throughout life, to be able to live the way that I want to live, to be able to move the way I want to move, to be able to have the financial means to live the way that I want to live and travel and do all these things. But a lot of that comes from taking care of myself. And then I love sharing what I do for myself to so that others can then hopefully find benefit in themselves as well, right? It's not about my situation being the one way, it is a way, right? My experience is my experience, and I feel like, Gary, your experience is your experience. And we bring those together to kind of find the common denominator that might work specifically for each one person that's listening. So I came up with these concepts of like, okay, what is the lowest hanging fruit for all of us? And that is trying to go back to understanding like how we got to where we are today from our early ancestors, right? And so I'm not ever trying to convince people to live the way that our early ancestors lived. But if we can understand that we evolved into what we are today from our early ancestors, then what did they do to get them to the point that they got to? And that is doing very simple things like just kind of stripping everything back to its most basic of forms. That means no shoes, no socks, no eating constantly every couple of hours, not having light and things like that at night. Maybe you can have a fire and things like this. So I try to kind of get the most primitive as possible. And then I pair that with modern technology because we live in a modern world, right? We obviously living in this modern world, we're able to have this conversation because of modern technology. We're able to talk about the things that we're talking about. We both have on our blue blocking lenses and we've got all these things. So we understand modern technology, but my hope is that we also appreciate our ancestral wisdom and we pair those together to find out what works. And so grounding for me was one of the first lowest hanging fruits because it costs nothing. All it costs is a bit of your time and dedication to understanding how and why it might work. And that is simply getting out in nature to get in contact with the living things. So a lot of people think that grounding is taking your shoes and socks off and putting your feet in the ground in the grass. Sure, that is grounding, right? But a lot of people don't understand that in order for grounding to work the way it's supposed to work, you need to be well hydrated as well, because there's this superior conductivity in the plasma in our body. The liquid that goes through our body is highly conductive when we are properly hydrated, when we have the proper minerals and nutrients in our body. So then that should tell you, well, how do I get to that, right? So it's like these rabbit holes of how we can encourage people to live so that they can then benefit from the tools that they are using. But if I just say that everyone should be going to go ground, then I've missed my mark, because there's this thing I like to talk about called transference. And please stop me if I'm going too quickly or.
No. Let's go deep, brother. So yeah, I'd love to understand.
Okay, so let's maybe take a couple steps back. What is grounding? And actually, I'm going to shut this window because it's a little loud in the background.
No worries.
Okay, so grounding or earthing is, I like to use analogies. It's very analogous to a battery. Like our cells act as capacitors, as little small batteries with a positive charge and a negative charge. When our body's always searching for balance. So just like a battery, it wants to be balanced positively and negatively. And so when our body gets out of balance, this is what we typically understand as inflammation. And that is because the body becomes highly charged. So that could be systemically, that could be locally, that could be acutely, that could be chronically. All of those are different scenarios. However, most of those are always it indicates that there's a highly positive charge. It's not a positive effect on us, but it's a positive charge that has a negative effect on us, right? I'm still with you.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So the earth, it generates free electrons, okay, or negative charge. It's a highly negative charge that comes from the earth. So when we can connect to that, it's like docking our phone onto a charging station, right? We now are giving the body, our human body, we're giving it electrons. So it's all these negative charges that can then pair with the positive charge in our body to help balance and neutralize the charge. So many people have probably heard of free radicals. Free radicals basically are these highly positively charged cells that are looking for its negative counterpart to stabilize it, right? So the moment you add grounding, you're adding in electrons or a negative charge so that then it's all balanced. Now your body has the capacity to do what it's supposed to do. So if the cell needs to kill off itself, it's a process known as apoptosis, then it can do that because it now has the energy to do so. If the cell needs to recycle itself, if there's a possibility to recycle itself, known as autophagy, then it can do that because it needs energy to do that. So all the processes in our body always needs energy, right? And this energy comes from having charged batteries. So we can talk about increasing the voltage. It's not even always about increasing the voltage, but it's stabilizing that voltage, right? So we need to be in this like perfectly, there's like a range of like 30 millivolts, I think, to like 70, somewhere in between there. I could be off. People are probably going to rip me up in the comments on this one, but I have this device here called a Vasia that uses microcurrent to measure the voltage. So if someone comes to me, because I'm a client, I work with different people in different ways, training, health coaching, or even pain resolution. But if they come to me and they have a pain or they have a problem in their body, sometimes I don't even tell them to tell me where it is, because I can find it with that scanner. I can scan the body for low voltage. Usually wherever there's low voltage or super high voltage, that indicates that there's a problem. Then based on that number, that feedback that comes back into the device, I can then set it to then repair or to give it what it needs. If it brings it down, we call it entrainment, right? So it can get it back into the healthy levels. And then it's, it happens every single time. Not to say that it always fixes the issue, but in that moment in time, it does help to balance it out. Grounding can do the same thing. So if a person's in an environment in which they can't take their shoes and socks off or get out in nature and put their hands on a tree or on a leaf or something like that, which let's be honest, most people can go and do that, right? Let's be honest. But if they want to maximize their time in doing that because they do see the benefit, then you can go to the next step, which is what I do, and get grounding devices. Okay, so I have a mat right here in front of me. My entire bed is grounded. I've got grounding capability always with me, but because I also have outside, right? I happen to live in New York City, but just outside here, there's trees and grass and dirt, right? So I can actually connect to that. So that's the lowest hanging fruit, I think.
And on that, I don't want to skip over on this because I think it's probably one of the most overlooked health hacks. I'm very aware of not going into the word biohack too often, because for perspective, I'm in the same area as you, right? We can be fully technology savvy and we wear blue blockers and we can be plugged in and we can gain everything that we can gain in nature for free. We can pay for it to get a device for it, right? And I'm more of the aspect of, if you can get it for free, if you can get the sunshine, if you can get into nature, rather do that. However, what I'm interested in knowing, because I've never measured it, is there a categoric difference between going out and forest bathing and using a PEMF mat, which is the grounding mat that you're speaking of, right? When you measure it?
The answer is no. There's not a big difference.
Okay, so you still get the same benefits if you use a mat.
Well, and it's a very good question, but the reason why I say no is because from the measurability aspect, it always goes to zero.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Makes sense, yeah.
So that's the reason why I answered it in that way. But if I'm wearing a different hat, right, or a different answer is of course there's a big difference, because one is in nature. One, you don't have to worry about if there's dirty electricity coming in through the cables and the plastic in the cables, and then what material are you putting your body on? No, when you're out in nature, the only thing you really have to kind of worry about is if there's EMF towers nearby, and okay, what are the implications of that? Sometimes there's people that talk about I forget what they're called, but there's these lines in the earth, these grid structures in the earth that might, have a negative effect. But that's getting way too deep into the weeds, even for someone like me.
Yeah, 100%.
So
is there a threshold? A threshold meaning, you alluded to it earlier, how people, you could grab onto a leaf no matter where you are. I think people are trying to do things as fast as they can. So is there a time where you said you would categorically tell a client, go out and spend just 10 minutes a day?
For me, I love this question because, and I'm smiling because part of the reason why I wrote the book that I wrote called The Awareness Shift, it's because I wanted to give people more autonomy instead of less. But I realized after writing it and still within my practice of what I do over the last 2 decades, is that people still want to know, what is that minimum effective dose. Like, what is the one thing, what is the right amount of time, the right amount of this? And I've discovered that there's a couple different types of people. There's some people who receive that information and they're gung-ho about it and they go through it. Then there's other people who use that as their crutch, who use that as an excuse to say, no, this is why I couldn't do it, because I couldn't do 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, I couldn't go outside, so I'm just not going to do it. So then they wait for the next thing. So then I just always say, do as much as you can. And that's it. So then usually that question goes, okay, so you're telling me 30 seconds? Hey, 30 seconds is better than 0. Right?
Yeah.
So do as much as you can. And the reason why I decided to buy the devices to have in my home is because then I can do it much longer.
Yeah.
So now I can do it every single day, every single night.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I completely believe in using both aspects, right? Because we can't, I mean, you can live outdoors and not in a building if you wish, but it's highly unlikely that you would do that. So it's like we enjoy our luxuries at the same time of remembering our ancestral patterns. So I've worked a lot in genomics for a long time, right? So if you see the structure of the genome, it's such a slowly developed structure within the body that it's taken thousands, tens of thousands of years to develop. When we've now, in the last 100 years, we've been able to get whole foods and get food from all over the world, and we can travel, jump on a plane, go to this country. The weather patterns change, which means the local food changes. Like, we didn't even know what's in our local organic food because there's so much micro and nanoplastics. There's just so many things targeting us. So I bring that up because I want to take it back to where you mentioned the negative charge of nature, which is actually ironically the positive side. And then when we are too positively charged, there's a lot of free radical damage, free radical oxygenation, think rust, moving through the body. Now, when our bodies are in a process of this rusting process where there's a lot of free radical damage going on, too much positive charge for a long period of time, this is normally when chronic illness sets in. So if I am going to play this mathematical equation out, if nature's negative ions reverses the free radical damage and brings down that positive charge to get the body in homeostasis, can we then categorically say enough dosing of nature can reverse chronic illness?
I mean, based on the way you put that out there, absolutely. Because chronic inflammation is at the root of most disease states.
Yeah.
So now, would I say it's the one thing or the only thing? Absolutely not. But it sets the stage for then bringing in whatever it is you might need to do it, right? So like, would I say that grounding is going to help someone with, is going to cure? I would never use that word, but would it completely help someone with rheumatoid arthritis? No. But it helps to set the stage for all the things that would be necessary to then help, because we don't know what got someone into that situation. Maybe it's genetic, or maybe it's something that they ended up ruining their gut. But I've noticed that, like, to be honest with you, I wish grounding was a part of every hospital. I wish grounding and sunlight was a part of every hospital. Now, one might be thinking, oh, you mean you want every hospital bed to be connected to a grounding pad? No. But in order to be able to get infrared light in the best of ways, or full spectrum light, and grounding is to go outside. And so in order to be able to do that, we probably wheel someone outside, or have access to it. Or maybe there's a way you could open up a window and then, but I feel like that would help every part, every process that would then be used to help someone get better. I feel like grounding is at the root of all of it, and should be, personally.
It's so interesting because if we just play common sense out, that feeling one gets when they go on a beach holiday and they jump into the ocean, or they just live near to the beach and they jump into the ocean, or they walk through a forest, is that massive sigh. And I always try and recognize that moment when I do that, because it's like you automatically feel the difference between the state of high stress that we don't even realize we're in versus we think it's ultra calmness, but it's just a balanced state in my opinion. And I love that. And I think if anyone can just notice that shift that you have, that's the shift we're talking about right now. Like grounding in whatever format you do it in, I think it's only going to boost your system in whatever shape or form. And it's going to make you alive.
And I love that you pointed that out, especially in the way you pointed it out, which is in that shift. Because let's be honest, that is exactly what I talk about in the book, the awareness shift, because it's you that is aware enough to be able to recognize that shift in your state. Not everyone feels that. That's why I wrote the book, because I want people to realize that there is a difference between, you know, like the person who's just on their phone walking through the forest, or, you know, or running away from something on a beach, or someone that has like this PTSD from a traumatic experience on a beach when they got bit by a jellyfish or something like that, right? Very different outcomes, but it's the person that is aware that we have the capacity to shift our state of being. That's the person that feels. That's the person that heals.
So now to move into gear 2, is that what provoked your interest in being barefoot as much as possible so that you can be more connected to the earth?
Eventually, yes. And the reason why I say eventually is because my first foray into the world of barefoot, and I didn't really realize it until I realized it, but I grew up in martial arts. So in martial arts, and in fact, most complex sports are done barefoot. If you think about it, right? So like things like martial arts, dance, ballet, tightrope walking, like a lot of these things require immense amount of sensory feedback and input to be able to move in very complex ways, right? So growing up in martial arts, it was either we had no shoes and socks on, or we had like very thin, you know, like tabis, kung fu shoes, tabis, whatever you want to call them, right? And so I used to think that I was a ninja, like a Ninja Turtle. I noticed the Ninja Turtles didn't really wear shoes, right? So I wanted to be like a Ninja Turtle. I thought I was a ninja. I remember many years I was a ninja for Halloween, and I had my own sword and all these cool things. But one of the things I thought was the coolest, because I felt like a Ninja Turtle, was wearing tabis. So I used to always wear tabis. But then it was when I got my black belt at age 12, and it was a family business. So my dad at the time, he was the sensei. He said my brother and I could play whatever sports we wanted to play in school after we got our black belt. That's when I got introduced to the Western world of sports. And I played basketball, and I began to like become really good at basketball. But it was the first time that I was exposed to the marketing of basketball, right? Because I used to play basketball in my backyard with my dad and my brother, and sometimes we'd play barefoot because it was on the grass, it was on the dirt, you know, and it was kind of cool. I'm not going to wear my expensive basketball shoes outside. And then I realized that, well, I never once rolled my ankle when I would play or do anything barefoot. But for some reason, when I entered into basketball, it was the first time that I noticed myself and some of my teammates and lots of people that I knew across the world of sports were rolling their ankles a lot. That's what got me thinking, like, wait a minute, this is interesting. So then as I got a little bit older, so I kind of was gotten farther away from basketball, then I started to realize there was all these other tools you could use to help your basketball game, like these things called jump soles, where they have these big platforms on the forefoot of your foot.
Yeah.
And it keeps your heel elevated. And I was wearing those things, and it was helping my calves. And I'm like, wow, okay, I'm getting stronger. And I started to understand that there's way more to this body than what we were being told. Because in like junior high and high school basketball, it was just like, okay, go lift weights and, you know, do the bench press, do some squats, do a few things. But they weren't really focusing on much beyond just, you need to lift some weights and then make sure to like learn the plays and shoot the basketball, right? As I got into college, I started to understand that there's different ways to train. So I started training myself. Then I got certified as a trainer because I was also working at GNC. So I was working at this nutritional store, and all of my teammates wanted to come in and get the hookup on all the supplements. But then they also were like, dude, I want to train the way you're training. It wasn't because I was jacked, because I was pretty jacked in college, but it wasn't because I was jacked. It was because they were noticing that I had made a big shift from when I entered in high school, or like from finishing high school to like several years into college. They saw the change. And then I started getting close with the like athletic trainers of the different teams I played for. Then I ended up playing professionally overseas, started to understand that there's different ways of training in different parts of the world. And long story short, I kind of got my first introduction to Vivo Barefoot. Once I decided I wasn't playing basketball anymore, I was going to become a full-time like trainer. And I came across this guy named Lee Saxby, who I would consider like one of my mentors for sure. And it was the first time that, even though I ran track in high school and I played basketball, this was the first time that someone was really talking about like optimizing my fitness, my performance from the ground up. And this was right around the time when the book Born to Run had come out.
Yeah, I've read it too.
And so I'm like, wow, there's all these things. And I got direct information from a guy who actually worked with some of the Tarahumara. And I was like, wow. And not only was he talking about feet, but he was also talking about how the entire body works. He was talking about nutrition and spirituality. And I was so fascinated. So I thought, okay, this is where I want to become like someone who gets all the things. And that's why I eventually became who I am today. So yeah.
It's fascinating because it's a rabbit hole I've been going down for so long as well. And it's it gets pushed back by the so-called experts on every corner, right? So a podiatrist, like I've seen a lot of like podiatry videos. Weirdly on TikTok, there's a lot of podiatrists that are going viral, and they'll like go do like compare shoes. And of course, Vivo is always the shoe that they always disregard. And then they're always like pushing these shoes that are, I mean, normal shoes are just shaped very weirdly, right? I mean, I'm sitting here with my leather Vivos.
Hey,
they don't look like a normal Nike shoe, or I mean, I'll call the brands out to you, a normal New Balance shoe. First of all, it's the big foam drop. It's the foam. You don't feel the ground. It's very rigid. Can't really move your foot. And that's what the experts are wanting people to have around their foot so it doesn't move more. Why is it really important for our feet to move, to splay out, to be able to actually interact with the world?
Okay. I'm going to give a couple of takeaways. So for those who want to take notes, get ready. Okay. Because there's a couple of nuggets of information that I'll give you. So one of the main takeaways, if people listening to this and watching this, if they don't take away anything except this one thing, then I'm happy. Okay. The best technology to go into a shoe is the human foot. Period. End of story. Far too often do we hear people talking about, well, okay, but like, you know, what about, but I overpronate, I over supinate, I have flat feet, I've got high arches, I got low arches, I've got heel pain, plantar fasciitis. I've heard it all. And it's interesting because I'm someone that lives in this world in which, you know, someone doesn't know who I am from a hole in the wall, but I walk into a shoe store or any kind of sports store, and I can't help but notice the way that some of the people who've maybe just been hired to work at this store that have no experience, not to say that you have to have experience to do it right, but it's like they're being taught to do it a certain way to at the end of the day, make sales. Okay. So, and I'm not going to bash anybody. However, I just want people who are listening and watching to just kind of be open-minded and just think for yourself. Because at the end of the day, we are being sold to all of the time. Full disclosure, I do work part-time for Vivo Barefoot. That's the transparency here. But this has been less than 2 years. I've been a part of Vivo Barefoot since 2009, though. That's when I got my training back in the day. So I've been preaching, and all I own is Vivos, right? it's not that they're the only shoe or whatever, but I mean, look, I work for the brand, so I get to hook up every once in a while. I get to have the new style. So why am I going to spend money on other ones if I don't? Now, I do test other brands. I do test other different shoes, like different barefoot shoes and things like that. But the best technology to go into a shoe is the human foot. So when you hear that, because that's the second time I've mentioned that, if a person hears that, one thing they should think is like, oh, so maybe I should be working on the best technology. It's like having a Ferrari and putting on the shittiest tires. Excuse my French, but I don't know. Do you
you can go all in. No, you can go all in.
Okay.
No,
So,
I don't mind.
but imagine you have a Ferrari. We know Ferraris are expensive. They're, amazing machines out there, or even Formula One, right? You could take any Formula One car, and if you have even just one speck of an issue with one of the tires, it's game over. It's game over. So I like to consider ourselves, our bodies. I hope that people who are listening and consuming this information, I hope that they consider themselves as being a superior machine of some sort. But if you don't have the best tires on it, which would be your feet, because obviously the tires on an F1, it's not the only thing that senses the ground, but it's a conduit to sense where the car is, right? So all those sensors that the tires and the wheelbase is connected to, that's the same sensory input we have in our feet. So we have sensory receptors in the bottom of our feet that make up 70% of our proprioceptive system. 70%. So this is why it's important, right? Now, why does that matter? Okay, I like to talk about this in an analogy as well. It's hard to say that. In an analogy. There you go. So if you think of sensory receptors as the receiver of information, I like to look at that as a lock, like a padlock. Okay, a padlock has a hole that goes into it. The key connects to it, right? So that'd be like the transmitter to the receiver, the key to the lock. Our environment is the key to our sensory receptors, that is our foot. That's what lets us know where we are in space and what moves around. So it's almost like it doesn't really make too much sense to me to have a bunch of sensory receptors and receivers without its counterpart. So when we block that, it's like, well, good luck ever getting the door unlocked because there's something in front of the keyhole, right? That's how I look at it. And so, or if you want to think about it in terms of sound, if there's, something emitting a sound, but you put a case over it, the sound is not going to, maybe you still hear it, but it's not going to be received in the same way. If you put something in front of as content creators, we all have transmitters and receivers with our microphone setups, right?
Yeah.
What happens if you put too many things in the middle of that transmission? It gets dumbed down, it gets blocked. Same thing happens with our feet. So when you put foam or layer upon layer beneath the foot, it just slows down, or it slows down that information. And the information is important to get from the foot to the brain and back. We call that synaptic firing. So that synaptic signal to then allow us to make a change, to move, to do what we need to move or do, that comes from this quick reception and transmission, right? So I like to ask people, okay, and I can ask you this, Gary, and you can let me know what you think. But back to what I said earlier, do you know anyone, whether it be yourself or someone you know, that has rolled their ankle, like severely hurt their ankle when they were barefoot?
I mean, out of the top of my mind, I don't actually, because if I think about it, one, I don't know too many people that are always barefoot besides for kids, right? And you never see a kid roll their ankle, right? And I've been running, I would say I've been running less with barefoot, but I never injure myself. And it's funny, if anything, my body forces me to slow down if I can't run faster, because I'm going toe heel instead of heel toe, and run slow. That's like exactly where I'm at. But based on what you're saying now, right? So I'm like, this wasn't planned at all. I wasn't planning actually to wear my vivos, but they're the most comfortable shoes. When I bought these, right? And then just your usual, if you're listening in, they're just like your usual leather vivos. I don't know what model these are, but anyway.
I think those are the raw.
Yeah, there's you've got, I don't know how many millimeters between there's a sole right at the bottom. So is that sole not blocking that keyhole per se?
Great question. So again, the best technology to go into a shoe is the human foot, including vivos, right?
Yeah.
So first and foremost, if anyone were to ask me what's the best shoe, I say no shoes and socks, your bare feet. Then here comes the cheesy pickup line here, right?
Yeah.
When you can't be barefoot, be vivo barefoot.
Mm.
Because shoes were first designed as a protection mechanism to protect from the elements. And when we say that, when people hear that, well, what do you mean by elements? That's things like sticks and rocks and glass and heat, cold, right? When you need protection, you best have something like a Vivo that has its puncture resistant sole and things like that, without sacrificing the ability for the foot to be a foot, though. Because the moment, so for instance, when a shoe was first built eons ago, when they were first built, it wasn't, oh, well, it needs to have a heel stack and needs to be constricted and this and that. Hell no. No, it was literally rawhide strapped to the foot so that the foot could still be a foot, because the persistence hunters that are our early ancestors, they were able to feel the vibrations of other animals through their feet. That's how in tune they were with the earth. This is how they also became really good trackers and things like that. But like nowadays, you think we could feel if someone is coming? Like, no, because we're not in tune with the earth anymore, right? And so at some point when it became a status symbol to have like a very pointed shoe and to have a heel, I mean, extra heels were actually designed to keep our feet in stirrups. So it became a status symbol because people who had horses usually had more money. Therefore, they don't have to do the work that the other grunts had to do.
That's interesting.
So at some point, it was kind of seen like barbaric and wild and savage to be barefoot. Why? Oh, because it's more, you have more status. The more pointed your toes are, the higher your heel is. There's no performance out of that, right? If anything, it's a detriment to our world. So then it's like, well, okay, then what about like, okay, so then we went from the medieval times when the toes were pointed to then wearing these high elevated heels to then sometime in like the 70s when Nike built the first like running shoe. To be honest with you, it was pretty flat. It wasn't like a super high elevated heel. Track shoes even today are pretty thin.
Yeah.
However, they're still restricted. They're still constricted. So why is okay, so let me take a step back. There's three main criteria at Vivo that we look at. And then maybe I would say the Foot Collective takes it to another degree deeper. But the first three is wide, thin, and flexible. Okay. A shoe needs to be wide so your toes can splay. Because if you think about someone trying to do a handstand, right? Handstand is a very hard thing to do. But how many people do you know that would try to do a handstand with their fingers like this, smashed together? Not many.
Yeah, no one. Yeah.
And then if they do, I'd be like, dude, are you playing with me? Like, come on, right? Come on, let's be real, okay? But like, how synonymous are our hands to our feet? Very synonymous, right? Because our fingers match our toes. These are the metatarsal heads. This would be the ankle. This would be the calves, the knee, the hip, right? Biceps or quads, hamstrings, right? So it's interesting to me how similar our hands are to our feet, yet we don't think about having our toes splay to have better balance. But as we get older, falls become one of the biggest predictors of death, right?
Yeah.
Like, so if we want to prevent falls, falls lead to death in older populations. People, I hope, understand this. But one of the best preventative measures for that is toe strength and toe ability. And that's because the wider you can make your base, the easier it is to stabilize. But even if you stabilize, if you have, you can spread your toes out, but you have all this thick material underneath the foot, I'm talking like super thick, you still don't have the ability to know where you are. And so you have a higher stack height to fall from when you roll the ankle. So if you were to roll your ankle when you were actually barefoot or in a low profile shoe, you have more time to adjust. When it's stacked up high, it's a more aggressive turnover, therefore manifesting a much aggressive injury. So that's wide. Thin, the thin part is so that we can feel the earth, which you just talked about, what you just touched on. So, you know, vivos have a variety of sole thickness. The shoe called the Modus Flex or the Census, it's like a moccasin. It's like our thinnest shoe, most flexible, most thin shoe. It's literally there just to have a bit of a protection, right? And that's about it, right? The foot is a foot. And then we go up into the more robust, I like to call them robust shoes because it has a little bit more oomph to the sole. And that's like our hiking range, right? We've got our desert boots, we've got our hiking boots, we've got our trail running boots, things like that. But it's still wide, thin, and flexible. But it's thinner than a regular hiking boot, but thicker than the Census, right? So, but obviously, we wouldn't hope that people are using those shoes every day, right? You wouldn't be using a hiking boot every day unless you're a hiker, and then there you go, right? Unless you live in a hiking community.
Why would you need thicker if you're hiking? Because here's my thinking, right? So I got the shoes that I just showed you now. They're quite thin. I actually bought them when we were living in Paris, just like on 3 years ago. And I feel cities are very unnatural, right? So I don't think we've ever in the human history ever walked on concrete as hard as concrete all day, every day. And I found when I was walking in such thin soles, my feet would feel bruised, right? And yes, I probably wasn't as used to barefoot shoes at that time. Versus you could put me on a trail, which was softer ground, and I can go way longer without getting, say, bruised feet or whatever that is. Is that something you just get over, or is it something about our environment?
It's a bit of both, and you've hit the nail on the head. That's it. What you're alluding to is this notion of we need to make sure that we transition properly, not too much too soon. If you're not used to wearing barefoot shoes, then I think one of the lowest hanging fruits is just, even in our homes, we should not have our shoes and socks on, right? We should be as barefoot as possible. If you don't have a space outside that you can be actually barefoot, then find you the best wide, thin, and flexible shoe that you can find that gives you enough protection, right? And you're right. We were not built to be on flat concrete for most of our lives. So I treat that very, very much like going to do exercise for the first time. You know, you're not I don't know, I could be wrong, but like you're not a swimmer, right? Like a competitive swimmer, are you?
No, I did triathlon, but
okay,
yeah. So I've had my fair share of time in water, but I wasn't a pro swimmer or anything.
Okay, have you ever competed in CrossFit?
Not competed, but I have participated in it.
Okay, so let's say the average person who's never done something like a CrossFit or a triathlon, but they decide, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to give it a shot just because I heard that it's really healthy for me. They go out the next day and they do it at a competition level. What do you think is going to happen to them?
Injuries.
Yeah, injuries, soreness, all kinds of craziness. However, we don't consider what that is like to our feet. That's like the equivalent of going out and doing a marathon if you've never been barefoot, and then you go and get thousands and thousands of steps. So I want to encourage people to understand that, yes, there is a transitionary period in which we should all look at, and it's different for every person. But there was a study that was done where they took a group of students for 6 months. They followed these students. I think it was like 80 students they followed for 6 months. And they asked them to wear the shoes. So they tested their toe strength, right? Their ability to pin their toes down, to do all these different things with their feet. They measured their toe strength at the beginning. And then they asked them to wear the shoes, doing nothing different except 80% of the time just wearing the shoes, walking around, living life, doing that. And then at the end of the 6 months, they remeasured them and they found a 57.4% increase in foot strength across the participants. Okay, so that's nearly 60% of foot strength simply by allowing your foot to be a foot. They didn't do any toe exercises. They didn't do any foot drills or anything like that. Just literally walked around, did what you did, right?
Mhm.
That's pretty significant. No matter how you slice it, like to get 60% of doing nothing but changing your footwear is pretty significant.
Mm.
So then that should make the average person go, well, wait a minute. What if they did do exercises, foot drills and towel scrunches and toga and toe yoga and all these different things? Imagine what would have happened, right? And so a lot of times we don't look for a change in our footwear or in our gear until we have like an issue or a problem. For me, I was developing bunions, which is why I decided to go down this road of like really going after it, getting rid of all of my shoes. Didn't really care what they looked like because I didn't want to have to get bunion surgery, which I almost had to on both of my feet. Now I don't. And so I help people in this very scenario. I mean, out of all my friends, there's been only one person who knew me and knew all the stuff I was talking about and still ultimately opted for bunion surgery.
Yeah.
And I think she regretted it now. And I told her what would probably happen, because just because you go and get the surgery doesn't mean that you fix the issue. Because what's the issue? Crowding the toes.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I completely agree. It's funny. I think I'm kind of lucky because I was born with really wide feet to begin with, like and I mean, I'm understating it. It's like my dad always used to say I could have been a firefighter because I could stamp out the fires. Like my feet are like just super wide. I've always battled to buy shoes because shoes have always been super tight. Doesn't matter what brand, right? But then I started wearing barefoot shoes and now my feet are like wide on another level, right? So it's like, it's funny. So my feet are quite hardy. I've got to the point now where, I mean, I love being barefoot and I can categorically feel the difference. And actually yesterday, knowing that I was going to interview you, I finished my last ultra run about 8 years ago. It was like 4 weeks after a full Ironman. And it could have been shoes, it could have been overtraining, it could have been everything. But anyway, I tore the labrum in my hip and I just haven't really run since then. So yesterday I was like, took myself off to the local field here. It was nice grass. And I went for like a 5K run, just like barefoot. And it was
barefoot.
Yeah, barefoot. Like
good,
full on, no shoes and all that. And I just felt like a kid. I felt like a kid. I was happy. I was probably running. I don't know. I wasn't running fast. I was trying to push every now and then. I was running toes first, and no pain. I didn't feel like I'd run afterwards. It was just like, no, I didn't run a half marathon or anything, but it was just, it showed me how. And here's the key: I felt it in muscles that I didn't know existed. So it was like, I was like, holy shit, this part of my leg has never hurt like this.
That's right. Right. Well, see, you're saying all the things that it's like music to my ears. And I'm glad you are saying this because obviously we just physically, or not physically met, but we just met before we started recording, right? So we didn't really have a lot of time to like get to know each other. So none of this was planned, right? But I'm happy that you said that because most people in my world, like the barefoot people, they almost all have a similar story, which is when I first got the shoes, I went out, I did X, Y, and Z, and I was sore for days, right? Same thing can happen with and without the shoes, right? Clearly in your case, right? Which is why I feel like it's a big responsibility for me to always tell people to transition properly, right? Mm-hmm. But what I'm excited about is that you did it. You didn't hurt yourself, thankfully. That's good. But you did it with no shoes and socks in the grass, which means not only did you do the running and got the benefits of that, the strength and the new muscle engagement and the cardiorespiratory benefits, but you also got grounding while you were doing that. And it felt good, right? Mm-hmm. This is what's important. So I just recently, last week, I was doing the same thing. I did it with a group of about 60 or 70 Gen Z people at this thing called the Tough Sprint Club in Austin. And I had everybody take off their shoes and socks and we ran around the infield, right? Yeah. People were like kids again. I mean, they were already really young, right? Yeah. But they were really like skipping and like, oh, laughing. And I'm like, yeah, this is what I'm talking about, right? And it was simply asking people to take off their socks and shoes, their shoes and socks. And so, like, I want to just give one more little analogy to help drive this point home as to why this is important. Because I think this was the big question for you towards me, which is kind of like, why am I such a proponent of foot health? It's because something that I think we can all understand is like, if we were to break a joint or break a bone in our body, let's say we broke our elbow, we know that we need to go and cast that elbow. I think you call it plaster there,
Yeah.
but right. So, but we call it a cast here. So you cast it to do what? To immobilize the joint so that the bone can set in place and it can grow and it becomes healthy again eventually, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we broke our elbow and we had an elbow cast on, we would have to assume, it's safe to assume because you're going to wear that for 6 to 8 weeks, that when you take the cast off, it definitely smells, right? It itches a little bit, but
Yeah.
it smells, but it also is smaller. So we get a lot of atrophy at our joints, not just the elbow, but like the forearm, the bicep, because we don't use that arm as much because it's immobilized. So immobilization in this scenario means it got weaker, clearly, because it was injured and needs to heal and it was immobilized. That's why it got weaker, right? So what do you do once you take the cast off and you want to get back to normal? You PT, you rehab, you build the strength again. So you go and you do all the things that you weren't able to do, and you're like excited to do this again because now you can start to see that the muscle is starting to get the same size as the other, and sometimes even stronger because you gave it a lot of attention. Well, that's what happens with our feet. Constrictive conventional shoes, to me, I consider them foot casts or foot plasters, because for a moment in time, it's immobilizing that foot, which is okay if it's what you're going to do because you're going to a wedding or you're going to a nice event, you want to wear the fancy shoe. But then we should be doing what we do when we take off the cast on our elbow, is to strengthen it again, recover it, right? But we don't do that because we think, it's normal. So some people do this all day, every day for their entire life. So it's no surprise that they never strengthen their feet. So it's these are the people that definitely need to transition properly. They need to go and like when I do workshops, I was in Austin all last week. I did like 6 different workshops, and I'm talking to people who are barefoot wearers. They wear barefoot shoes, and I say, listen, just because you wear barefoot shoes doesn't mean that you're good to go. You don't just check a list and you're good to go. Like, I want you to take off your socks, because socks can even be constrictive as well, right? So this is one thing that I even challenge people at Vivo Barefoot about this, right? It's like, look, this is why, I don't know if you can see this. I got toe socks on.
Yeah. That's so funny. We can
there we go. There we go, right? So I wear toe socks simply because it doesn't make much sense for me to invest in a shoe that has a wide toe box when my toes are still restricted.
Makes sense.
Right? So all I want people to understand is I just want you to think about it. You don't have to agree with me, but just think about what I'm saying and go, okay, well, wait a minute. Maybe conventional shoes are the antithesis of what he's talking about with the wide, thin, and flexible, because most conventional shoes are narrow, thick, and rigid. It's the opposite, complete opposite, right? So if you want to run a fast marathon, I don't consider that to be like, I don't really ever expect to see anyone competing at a high level in vivos, right? It doesn't really make sense, because you got these carbon plates, you've got these, thick soles that can, help you roll through. Yeah, if you're going to run for performance and you're getting paid to be a performance runner or a performance athlete, by all means, do what you got to do, but recover from that.
Rehab, yeah.
So I would say use vivos as a recovery tool.
I just saw that at Wimbledon now. I think one of the top competitors, one of the tennis players in the final. I don't know.
Yes and no.
Yes and no. Okay.
I mean, you didn't see him playing with them on, did you?
No.
So he used them for recovery.
Yeah, he used them for recovery. Yeah.
So he was on the court with the shoes, but because as you might imagine, like, and I am fortunate enough to work with a lot of these athletes, professional athletes. So a lot of like tennis coaches. In fact, after I finish with you today, I'm going to go and meet up with my buddy, who is like a very high level tennis coach. Right. So we talk about all these things. So a lot of these tennis pros, whether it's, tennis or it's the NBA, basketball or football, a lot of the athletes have these big money deals in which they're sponsored and they have to wear said shoe on the court or on the field, right? But a lot of them are training in our shoe because I say, look, it doesn't really matter if we ever see this in your competitive space because we get it. We can't even compare to like the Nikes and the Adidas of the world and the Under Armours. However, I would prefer you to put a stronger foot into a conventional shoe than to not ever try it in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's so cool that it's, you know what I love about Vivo Barefoot? It used to be a very like 2009 when you found barefoot shoes, when you found Vivo, it was, let's call a spade, right? It was a very hippie looking brand. Now it's become very trendy, very cool to have Vivos on, which is, it's music to my ears. So I did my transition, and this is a loaded question because, so I did my transition into running. I actually, my ultra distance running, all that I did, and my Ironmans, I was already doing them in ultras before ultra went into these 8 mil drops. It was literally 0 drops. They're changing their brand a bit, but it was a normal foot shaped shoe, ultra. And then you have obviously got, so my question is this, I went into that as a transition shoe. And then I have also been looking at Birkenstocks as a transition shoe. If you take the insole out, that's what I mean.
Ooh, here we go. Here we go.
So I bought a pair of Birkenstocks the other day because there were some nice shoes to wear, but I pulled the insole out because they were terrible. So it's lowered the drop, and there's no like nothing keeping my foot in a weird shape. So question to you: is it okay in the barefoot space to like put on a pair of ultras that are 0 drop, put on a pair of Birkenstocks without the insole in?
Okay, great question. I get these questions all the time. So it's like I already have responses for it, but I will try to personalize this for this show because I want it to feel authentic, because it's a very good question. And there's levels to this shit, period, right? That you could quote that. There's levels to this shit, right? Because look, at the end of the day, remember I rattled off the 3 criteria that we look for, at least at Vivo, is wide, thin, and flexible.
Yeah.
But obviously that's not quite enough. For the average person who's never even considered a barefoot shoe, it's a really good, 3 things to kind of get them to go, oh, okay. So if I'm going out and trying to buy a pair of shoes because I want to get into this, like, well, that's not wide, so not that one. Okay, well, that one's wide, but it's not flexible, right? So wide, thin, and flexible is a good criteria. But the Foot Collective takes it a few steps further. So they have the 5 Fs. So that is foot shaped, which you touched on earlier. Foot shaped means it's just widest at the toes, narrow at the heels, right? The next one is fixed. So theirs is kind of in like a triage effect. Fixed means it's attached to your foot. Birkenstocks don't really meet that criteria.
They don't attach to your foot. Yeah.
Right. So we're only on step 2 with that one.
Yeah.
Right? And the reason for that is because if it's flopping around or even loose, even just a little bit loose, the toes want to over grip or grab, and we call that hammer toes. So you start to develop hammer toes. So this is what hammer toes mean. It's just basically this excessive gripping or over gripping when it's not necessary because you're trying to keep the shoe on. This is also why flip-flops, thongs as we call them sometimes, this is why those aren't very good. I used to wear flip-flops all the time thinking that I was doing something good, but I was actually just over gripping. Okay.
So is that why the sizing on a Vivo, just to quickly go on a tangent, the sizing of a Vivo, you should get sizing so like your toes pretty much to the front?
No, not necessarily. You want to have as much room as you can in the toe box area, but this is why we have shoelaces today in the world anyway, so that we can adjust different parts. A lot of people think that it's just there for like a design, but it's actually so we can adjust, because some people have a wider forefoot than others. But yeah, like it can still be fixed to your foot, but still have a lot of space in the toe box, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah. So we got, what is it? The foot shaped, and then fixed. And then I think the next one is, I'm looking this up because I have this written down. I want to make sure I get the right order. So foot shape, fixed, flat. So that's the 0 drop.
Yeah.
Okay. Birkenstocks meet that. Ultras meet that, which is great. But people, I hope they understand that if you have a lift or rise in the heel, so like they call it a drop because they're measuring it from the heel down to the toe bed. So that's why they call it a drop. But most people would look at it as a heel rise. So any amount of heel rise simply throws off our posture, even if it's just slight. But it eventually shortens our posterior chain, especially at the Achilles and the calves, right? And so one of our most powerful engines of our lower body would be our arch and our Achilles tendon. So if you're messing with that, shortening it up and doing all these different things, and then when you're eventually asked to take off your shoes, this is why we end up getting this overstretching and all these issues start to happen, right? This is also the reason why a person should transition properly from a conventional shoe, which usually has a heel rise, to a more flat shoe. Okay. So anyway, yes, there's that. Also, okay, it's one other thing. When the heel is lifted and we do a natural walking pattern or a very unnatural running pattern, when there's more cushion at the heel, the rocker of the heel becomes unstable. Well, it's unstable, right? Because it's a ball.
Yeah.
Right. And then the shoe maybe adds a little bit of width, but now you've elevated that. So you see why it becomes even more of a problem with ankle injuries, knee injuries, because typically the heel striker is out in front of the center of mass. So gravity is straight down. Okay. So that's why the ankle, the knee, and the hip get more pressure, more ground reaction force, which could be an issue of that whole labral tear that you got. Yeah. Right.
100%, because I've got the same side shoulder injury and elbow. Yeah, like literally. Yeah.
Yeah. Because obviously if you're again, if a person's not running, and I'm not saying you don't run correctly, but that's a whole nother conversation we can talk about if you want, another rabbit hole, but I can talk about running form. But I digress. 2 more on the F's. The next F. So we got foot shaped, fixed, flat, flexible is the 4th F. So that's just, can you flex through the toe? Why is that important? Because if you notice, some people walk with their feet turned out, or they look like they waddle. These are people who do not push off through the flexion of the big toe. So if we're not able to fully flex through that, push off through that big toe, then we're not getting proper propulsion through the arch, which becomes one of the more important engines of the lower body, right? So if you're not getting proper activation of the arch, you shouldn't expect to get proper activation of the calves. But it's the reason why when you went barefoot running, you felt those new muscles, is because chances are you were using the muscle that your body wanted you to finally use, because you can do that, right?
Makes sense.
And so the last one is feel. So feeling just is that sensory input we were talking about. So if it's really thin, then you can actually feel, because at the end of the day, our body is all about sensory experience. We feel our ways through life. But when you restrict that feeling because of a conventional shoe or because of conventional clothing, then we're just restricting our ability to sense the world we live in, period. I'll shut up.
I love that. And I'm going to put a big period, full stop at the end of that, because I think that is so much for everyone to digest. And it's even for me, as much as I know how important being barefoot is, even that is, my mind is going in so many different directions, and I want to go out and just go throw out all my shoes. So thank you for that. And I'm sure this has probably got many people thinking further. And so I think what we should do is we need to bring you back to focus fully on animal flow movements, primal movements, running form, and all of that. Let this sink in with everyone. And then we do a round 2, because I know everyone's attention spans as well. And we do a round 2 then later down the line on how to now take that foot strength and activate that in the body so that we're eventually climbing trees and running away from tigers and just kicking ass.
Yes. Which is what I like to teach, which is barefoot movement. I have some concepts that I've rolled out, and hopefully soon you'll start to see some pop-up classes happening around the country and the world, hopefully. But I do agree with you. I think it's worth kind of letting this simmer a little bit. And I don't know how you run your platform, but if you want people to like have questions knowing that I'm going to come back.
Yeah. Where can people find you though? So like when you talk about, you've got these workshops happening and you've got everything going. So tell us where we can find you.
Yeah. The best way to find me is on any social media platform. I'm at Joshua J. Holland. And so the J is my middle initial in between Joshua and Holland. So Joshua J. Holland is basically on all social media platforms. Also, my website is joshuajholland.com. And then I have a podcast called Simply Walk the Talk. That's where I also talk about a number of things that I maybe don't get an opportunity to dive as deep into on regular social media, but I definitely get in depth on it on my podcast. I also feature myself in other interviews like this when I'm on other people's podcasts. And then I have a course, at least one course so far, on the Vivo Barefoot website. So if you go into there's a section on the website that says, I think, why barefoot? And then in there, you've got like guides that are for free. And then you've got courses that people can purchase as an add-on to their shoes if they want to dive a little bit deeper. And one of mine on there is the Barefoot Running Guide.
Okay, that's amazing. I'm gonna throw your name out when I head out into London and go to the Vivo shop there.
Oh yeah, please do.
I need to go get myself a whole brand new range.
Walk the talk, talking facts. Move like me, but I move a little fast. Make my move, here to last. Fasten these seatbelts, I'm coming past. Take care of me, longevity. Hack my biology, better believe. Walking the talk, soul, mind, and body connected. Better come give us a listen. Better come give us a minute or two. Open the box up, we giving you tools. Giving your engine the fuel that it needs. Breathing into it, it's autoimmune. Make a connection with stronger and two. Making us one of a kind of a few. Work on the mind, but show me your moves. Do what you say, you know what to do. Take care of me. Longevity, hack my biology, better believe. Walking the talk, soul, mind, and body connected. Better come give us a listen. Better come give us a minute or two. Open the box up, we giving you tools. Giving your engine the fuel that it needs. Breathing into it, it's autoimmune. Make a connection.